Hello again everyone and welcome back to the Underground. This is the Intel update for August the 4th through the 10th, 2024. Today we're going to do something a little bit different, and I'm not going to talk about American news today. I'm going to really spend most of the time talking about what's going on in the United Kingdom as well as the Middle East. I know there have been a lot of incidents worthy of note in the United States that have been worthy of talking about this week. However, you can read what I wrote this week in The Wire. If you just read those, that'll get a pretty good summary. And I thought that dedicating the time this week to talking about the UK is a little bit more pressing due to the potential for things in Europe to spiral out of control. So, as many of you know, there's a pretty big crisis going on in the United Kingdom right now, and I thought that this would be a very good opportunity to, one, point out the misinformation and propaganda that's going on, and also for the American audience who doesn't give one hoot about what goes on in Europe, this is still a good learning opportunity. You don't get very many chances in life, these days at least, to learn from others' mistakes in the way that they're happening in the United Kingdom with regards to what might happen in the United States. I'm not saying that what is happening in the United Kingdom is sort of a good proxy for what's going on in the United States, but it might be, some elements of it for sure. So even for those of you who don't care about what goes on in Europe, this might still be a good learning opportunity. So, what's happening in Europe? Right now in the United Kingdom there are, well, mass unrest is the best way I can describe it. Initially, this started as rioting in response to the stabbing and murder of 3 children in Southport, as well as the wounding of others. For those of you who have not been keeping up with the UK's news over the past few years, the UK has been kind of the canary in the coal mine with regards to the violence and the really skewed system of operating when it comes to immigration. So, just for the American audience, we've all probably seen the chart that is being touted as being the chart that saved Donald Trump's life during his assassination attempt, the chart that was actually on screen that caused him to turn his head to look at the screen. This is that chart that he was looking at, and this is detailing the illegal immigration that has occurred in the United States over the past few years. Well, the UK has their own chart, and here's what it looks like. So, as you can see, the non-European, non-EU member state immigration has just skyrocketed to extremely high levels in a very short period of time. So this has caused a lot of problems. Hopefully, as we all know, riots and social unrest does not occur in a vacuum. It does not just spring up out of nowhere for no reason. There are reasons for people being upset, being angry. Sometimes it's more stoking the fires. Sometimes it's more a genuine sentiment of how people feel, and it's really challenging to discern that sometimes. But generally speaking, people are not just rioting in the UK just for no reason right now. So this is the result of not just one horrific crime against children. This is the culmination of years and years and years of the exact same situation occurring. So this map shows all of the locations that I could find where there were demonstrations or violence or some sort of unrest over the past week. And as you can see, it's most major cities in the UK. I left a few off because I think that there are a lot of old, outdated clips that are being touted as more recent, and they're just that's really inaccurate. For instance, one of the things that's kind of been going around is people sharing clips of the Leeds riots from some time ago and trying to push them as they're real. There has been some activity in Leeds, but I'm not really sure how much of that is genuine. But I have seen people showing old clips, so just keep that in mind when you're cruising social media. There are probably a lot of older clips being pushed as current, but this is the chart that I've got, just from me checking out social media and seeing where I can find some of these unrest sites. But again, it's really hard to say how much of this is quite severe, right? You can put pins on a map all you want to, but it really doesn't give you an idea as to how severe the rioting is in a certain area. For instance, I could tell you that, you know, down in Plymouth, there really wasn't that much activity. There's just some unrest and local, like, protesters and counter-protesters kind of, you know, fighting amongst each other. Whereas up in Sunderland, things got pretty kinetic. Same thing over in Southport, where all of this sort of started. Blackpool, Manchester, Liverpool, these kinds of regions, they're geographically close, so the riots tended to spread kind of in these little pockets. There have also been demonstrations over in Ireland as well. Not really many that I would really say are, you know, astronomically out of the ordinary. For instance, up there in Belfast, they've firebombed a few police cars, they've rioted quite a bit, you know, burned down a few buildings here and there. So pretty much status quo, especially in the context of the counter-immigration protests that they themselves have been going through as well. So, you know, not really anything out of the ordinary there. Whereas in London, you know, things to get off there is a little bit more telling, I should say, because London is basically the heart of the beast when it comes to a lot of these counter-protest movements. So, all in all, there have been, well, British media, which is none of which are telling the truth. British media is claiming that there have been around 400 arrests. I think it's probably more than that. I don't know, maybe less in some areas. I don't really know. So this is already a headache and a half to figure out what's going on, because there's just so much kinetic activity. Now, I will say right up front that right now, about a week or so after the initial riots kind of calmed down, the riots have shifted. Okay, so we'll talk more about this in just a moment when we get into the factions that are at play here. But I just want to, from my own assessment, you know, based on the extrapolation of raw data, processing it here in my brain piece, and then coming to a conclusion, I think that most of the riots now are not really what the media is saying they are. It seems like there was a lot of initial rioting, crime, looting, the general bad parts of riots that tend to come out. That occurred after the situation got out of hand in places like Southport and Sunderland. From that, there hasn't really been that much rioting to the level of like street crime and just attacking people for no reason from the people that the UK is saying it's coming from. This is really hard to explain, so I think it might be best to just jump right to explaining the factions at play here, and we can maybe try to piece some of this together. So let's go ahead and jump to the PowerPoint slides. All right, jumping to the uber technical graphic arts studio, let's talk about some of the groups that I've been able to kind of identify with regards to the protests and demonstrations and rioting and violence and all kinds of bad stuff going on in the UK right now. So there's a lot of finger pointing amongst these groups, and it's not really being accurately portrayed by the media. I will state right up front that a lot of what I'm about to say is going to be very, very offensive. I'm trying to be the most accurate that I can be. However, you know, there's just no real way to talk about what's going on in the UK and be politically correct in any form or fashion. A lot of people try to think that they're, you know, not politically correct, but the very minute they hear a sort of, you know, differing view than them, they just screech, you know, incoherently. So I just really want to encourage everyone to kind of keep an open mind, realize I'm doing the best I can here, and corrections may be needed in due time as more of these groups become a little bit more sort of solidified, I should say. Right now, this is the best I've got. So let's start off with the target. Let's start off with the people that all of this is about. The hardest to define group, I will call these people ethnic Britons of Anglo-Saxon heritage, basically white guys in England. These are most British citizens, well, I don't know about statistically, but most traditionally British citizens, people who were born and raised in the United Kingdom, in the Isles of Britain, and have historically remained there for a period of time. These are people who are of Caucasian descent, of Anglo-Saxon heritage, and their ancestors have been in the United Kingdom for a very long time. The reason that I have to phrase it this way and use a whole lot of words instead of just saying white guys is because there is a lot of dissent as to what classifies a British citizen. You know, for instance, a lot of people may come from India and say they're a naturalized citizen, or, you know, they're a second generation immigrant, and they have accepted absolutely 0% of British culture into their own sort of daily operating procedure, which is why you see a lot of media misinformation. So, for instance, the guy that stabbed those kids in Southport, they're calling him a British citizen. They're calling him a Welshman, right, or something like that, because he is a citizen of the United Kingdom. He is a British citizen. So the media says he's British. However, he is a Rwandan immigrant. His parents are from Rwanda. So it's really probably best to define people not as British citizens in this case, but more along the lines of those who are of Anglo-Saxon heritage, because these people are the people who are really being labeled as far right. Here's that magic label, far right. The United Kingdom government, the British authorities are slapping this label on this group of people, right? Even though that's not the most accurate way to look at it. So we'll come back to that in a moment. Now, this group of people, the ethnic Anglos, these people are the most upset right now. These are the people who are demonstrating, protesting. These people, this faction, so to speak, was rioting in response to the events in Southport. However, for the most part, I've seen not a lot of violence coming from this group of people, not a lot of rioting, mostly demonstrations now. After the riots kind of calmed down, it looks like this faction at the moment is not rioting, they are demonstrating, they are protesting. There are exceptions, I will say that, there are exceptions. However, for the most part, this is going to be very, very important to mention when we talk about the semantics of what a riot actually is. So that's this group, the ethnic Britons, of really Anglo, descent, right? Sort of along these lines, I will mention these guys right now because I think it's important. And this next faction is the ethno-nationalists or the National Socialists. Basically, what we in America might slap this label on somewhat correctly, the far right. I hate this term far right because it's not really accurate. But generally, when you think of dudes, with swastikas and stuff like that, this is the group that you tend to think of. The more Aryan Nation kind of guys, this is this label appropriately. I don't think it's offensive. I think this is just kind of a self-applied label, honestly. Now, as far as these guys, the British authorities, this other faction over here, the British authorities are trying to make these guys, the ethnic Britons, seem like these guys. They're trying to paint every white guy in the UK as being an ethno-nationalist, and that's just not true. It's not true. I have not seen hardly any of these guys at all. You would be very hard-pressed right now in the UK to find anybody slinging up an old Roman salute, right? You'd be very hard-pressed to find anybody waving around a swastika flag. Otherwise, the Daily Mail would have it on their front page, right? Now, that doesn't mean they don't exist. I'm sure they do. However, the British government has targeted these guys so much over the years that they're underground, and they're not going to be active. They're not going to take the bait now. Now, that doesn't mean they're not active in other countries. I saw a video the other day. I'll see if I can find it again. I might not be able to find it again. Of ethno-nationalists, self-described, National Socialists, marching in Croatia. So, it's like, these groups do exist. I'm not going to say they don't exist. They exist here in the United States as well. It's just, I think the labels that the authorities are trying to put on these people, they're trying to lump in all Anglo-Saxons into this group, and it's just not true. They're just not the same. So if you want to be more technically correct, we can just kind of move these guys off to the side because I don't think they're a factor. The real old school, proper ethno-nationalists, they're just not that, I mean, they're active on social media, obviously, but in real life, I'm just not seeing them at protests in the UK, and I've been looking, and I just don't see them. What I do see is a lot of regular British guys just out there in the street. Now, again, this group right here has been persecuted the most out of all of these groups over the past few years, so they've probably got pretty good at operating. So my guess is after some time, and after these riots and the unrest kind of reaches a point of stability, the ethno-nationalists will try to, or are probably going to try to make themselves known a little bit more. But I hate using these terms because it's really hard to describe, and I feel like there's a lot of inaccurate fear-mongering labels put on a lot of these groups. But anyway, so we've got the ethnic Britons over here. Let's jump over to the other side of the aisle for a moment. Let's talk about some of the more, traditionally leftist groups. All right, let's leave the Muslim Defense League for a moment. Let's talk more about the climate activists, Antifa, or the International Workers of the World, the communists and socialists, and the pro-Palestine movements. Now these guys, oh man, this is a rabbit hole and a half. So these groups traditionally don't work that well together, but there is a lot of crossover. That's contradictory, but that's the way these groups operate. So, for instance, you've got Antifa and the IWW guys mostly being communists and socialists. So you'll have basically all of the members of Antifa will probably be members of some sort of communist or socialist society. Likewise, you'll probably have a lot of communists being climate activists, but not necessarily Antifa. Conversely, you'll have a lot of pro-Palestine dudes being involved in climate agenda stuff, but not necessarily Antifa or communists, but they do work with the same people who are sometimes members of the same organization. If this is complicated and confusing, I understand, but this is the way that this is kind of worked out. You may be tempted to do this right here. You might be tempted to stack all of these guys together and put them as part of all of the same group. I don't think that's accurate. I don't think that would be an accurate way of doing it. We have to do this sometimes for simplicity's sake, but most of the time that's not the way this works, because the pro-Palestine movement, just for example, is largely Muslim. A lot of the people who are pro-Palestine are, they're either of Islamic faith or they're just not of the belief systems that these guys are, who tend to be more atheist sort of thing. So you've got religion kind of being a factor as well. However, you've got a lot of pro-Palestine guys, like I said, being climate activists at the same time, which is why you'll see the same people show up to target Elbit systems, do kind of a counter-Israeli thing. But you'll see the same people show up to do something with the climate or something, or be a member of a socialist or communist society or organization. So it's really complicated. You see how this is kind of a big problem. Now, like I said, I don't like grouping these people together because it's not the most accurate way of describing it. If we want to get into semantics land, we can talk about all these differences in more depth. But for simplicity's sake, I have to kind of group these guys together for now, because these people are most of the people who are rioting right now. Now, what is a riot? Well, that word is kind of a charged term. See, here in the United States, a riot usually looks something like this. Burning down Minneapolis, that tends to be what we call a riot. In the United Kingdom, a riot could just be a protest in which a police officer gets shouted at. There could be no violence, there could be no property damage. Everybody could pick up trash as they leave the place, but the British media and the British authorities still call it a riot. So, generally speaking, when I use the term riot, I'm talking about destruction of an unreasonable nature, meaning things get broken, property damage occurs, people get attacked, there's fire bombings. Stuff that's more kinetic than just a rowdy protest in which people get shouted at. But that definition is different from what the authorities in the United Kingdom say. So these guys, these groups right here, tend to be rioting more so than anybody else. Now, let's talk a little bit about this group here, the pro-Palestine guys. Let me bring that to the front here. So there's a little bit of crossover here. Because these guys, the Anglos, the ethnic Britons, they tend to be more anti-immigration. That's the crux of their sort of argument is, keep Britain for the British sort of thing. These guys are attacking each other. Now, there is another faction I want to bring in here, which is growing, which is the Muslim Defense League. Now, if we're going to rate these guys on a scale of 0 to 10 in terms of violence, these guys are an 11. The Muslim Defense League was created in response to the English Defense League, which was basically, I think the English Defense League was a combination of these guys, the ethno-nationalists, and ethnic Britons who probably didn't know. I don't know for sure. The EDL is not really around anymore. I don't really know a whole lot of the history behind that. But I would say that the English Defense League is nowhere near the Muslim Defense League. These guys are, in my opinion, seriously bad dudes. These guys are doing roving gang. These are the guys who tend to have like roving gangs of people just beating people with sticks, enforcing Sharia law, doing all kinds of dominating things. It's just not a very good thing. So, in terms of rioting, these guys are like the tip top of the scale in terms of rioting. Now, is there crossover between the Muslim Defense League and the sort of pro-Palestine movements? Yes, of course, mostly along religious lines. But how close is this relationship? I don't know. Why do I not know? Well, because there's another faction that is complicating things immensely. And this is the most diverse group of all that I should have put into multiple categories, and that is the British citizens not of Anglo heritage. Basically, the second-generation immigrants or like the first-generation immigrants who have been in the UK for a very long time. This group of people is the most complex, and they can occupy a bunch of different sort of positions, I should say. For instance, so you've got the Muslim Defense League here. There are a lot of people who are siding with them because, well, they run home to mama, right? They run home to their heritage and their culture and their religion more so than their nation state. And if that seems inflammatory to you, well, let me just remind you that the former First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, has literally stated over the past couple of days that he could return to his traditionally Muslim homeland. So, this is something that has not gone unnoticed. When you've got even the leader of a nation stating, the very minute that their policies don't get adopted, they run home to their homeland. Well, that causes the question. Well, if you're going to abandon, your homeland, then why are you here in the first place? Well, we, the ethnic Britons, so to speak, speaking from their perspective, we, the Anglo population, we don't have a homeland to go to. So why don't you just go back to your homeland, sort of thing? Do you see how this can get really out of control really quickly? And how these people here, the British citizens not of Anglo heritage, can both be accepted into this group, the ethnic Britons group, or the Muslim Defense League route and the pro-Palestine and the whole pro-immigration route. You've got these people here sometimes being targeted by the Muslim Defense League because they are not Muslim. You have to remember, the United Kingdom has a huge Hindu population and a huge Sikh population. And I have seen reports, or indications and warnings, so to speak, that Muslims are attacking these guys because they're not Islamic. So we can see how complicated this is already becoming, right? This is already just insane with regards to politics and religion and culture and all these different kinds of things going on here. I will say that there is there's straight up adversarial relationship between the ethnic Britons and the Muslim Defense League guys. That is a straight up like war a brewing right there. That is not good. There's a lot of conflict there. There's probably very little hope of reconciliation. However, the ethnic Britons with the British citizens not of Anglo heritage, these guys are even kind of getting the short end of the stick sometimes, and there's conflict that is brewing for sure between these groups of people because of, well, battle lines are forming. And when the battle lines form, this is what tends to happen. All these guys tend to sort of conglomerate together, even though they don't normally operate together. That tends to be the way things work out. And in the more extreme case, you've got these guys allying with these guys, and then of course the police take the side of the immigrants, and there's your battle line. I don't necessarily know how accurate this is. I think it's very inaccurate, to be honest, because there's just too many factions at play here. I don't know if things are going to shake out this way with the battle line kind of forming along these stratifications here. I think that really as time goes on, these guys right here are probably going to side with these guys after a period of time, some of them at least. Whereas a lot of them are going to go back to their own heritage, their own culture. But I think you'll probably see climate activists drop out of the scene because, throwing a can of soup on a Van Gogh painting is a lot different than taking a Molotov to the face. These guys, pro-Palestine movements, will probably start to morph into the Muslim Defense League. These guys will probably align themselves more so with the British authorities over time, just because that's how that works out politically. So this may be, and the other nationalists will probably try to infiltrate or sort of skew the ethnic Britons. But I mean, again, I don't know if these movements can be considered to be the same anymore. Being an ethno-nationalist in, say, like 1995 in Britain is a lot different than being, an ethno-nationalist in today's society. It's just a different it's just a different definition, I guess. When I was growing up, in the late 90s, early 2000s, the sort of quote-unquote Nazis in society were like, the Aryan Brotherhood guys, the skinhead kind of organizations and people like that, that tended to be the way that worked out. And there was a lot of societal outcasting, so to speak, with these groups. Nowadays, I mean, it's just not, an ethno-nationalist in 2024 is not the same as a skinhead in 1992, So, I don't know. Maybe the same thing is going on in Britain, but it seems to me like there's both a shifting of this definition here and a sort of morphing into this and a closening of these kinds of ideas more so than anything else. The problem being is that these guys, the British authorities, want to claim that basically every white guy in the UK is a Nazi, and that's just not true. It's just ridiculous. So anyway, this is the overview. It's the very, very complex, tangled web overview of the factions that I've been able to find so far. Now, like I've kind of hinted at, there are other factors at play here. So let's jump to a different slide here, and let's just cut right to the chase with what people might consider to be a little bit more helpful. And that is the factional groupings in terms of the violence potential. So looking here at this slide, we have got, I've got 4 categories here. There surely are more, but let's just put these guys, these groups, these ideologies or whatever, in these 4 groups. So, as you might imagine, right squarely in this box are most ethnic Britons of Anglo-Saxon heritage. Most of the dudes protesting out there, they don't necessarily mind the old school immigrants. They just oppose the ones that have come to the UK with no verification, with no vetting, and they're bringing violence. They're not assimilating at all into British culture. They're just causing havoc. So this is what these people tend to believe. Now, of course, I'll bring in the other category here, the ethno-nationalists, National Socialists, whatever. These guys oppose all immigration for obvious reasons. Now, I will say that there is becoming, this group right here is shifting. Maybe I should put it in both boxes here. Because there are those who, within the ethnic, basically all the white guys in the UK, there's a split. There's those who oppose a recent immigration, and then there's those who oppose basically all immigration now. They've hit their limit, and the pendulum has swung back, and now they occupy a position of opposing all immigration, legal or not, right? We see the same thing in the United States. You know, we say, hey, look, even the legal immigration is not helping out the United States, or at least so people think. So you see that sort of same thing happen, but I don't know how far I should put this into either box. I'll just say that there are a lot of ethnic Brits that now oppose all immigration and the things that come with it. So let's go ahead and drop in some others here. Let's see. Pro-immigration, anti-violence. Well, who could be in that category? Well, obviously, the British citizens not of Anglo heritage. There are a lot of people in the UK that are very pro-immigration, but they don't want to use violence to achieve those means. I know that a lot of people would have you not believe this, but it seems like that is a factor. I think it's becoming less of a factor, so everyone in this pro-immigration, anti-violence box is shifting into this box. They're shifting from this box to this box more so than these guys are shifting into this box. So for instance, from these latest Southport riots, this was traditionally over the past few years where the ethnic Britons lied. Now it's shifting. It's not completely over here. I'll tell you that it's not completely over here. It's more of a duality there. Whereas a lot of people have immediately jumped faster than the Britons have jumped into this box, the pro-immigration and pro-violence to achieve those means. So who else would be in this pro-immigration, pro-violence category? Well, I think we can kind of all guess as to who might be in that category. We've got the communist, socialists, IWW, Antifa. Let's see here. Obviously, the British authorities and police, because, you know, just because they are law enforcement, they are by default able to use violence to achieve their goals. So being able to use violence to achieve political goals puts them in this category, and they're also pro-immigration. So again, thinking kind of outside the box, you have to really, ironically thinking outside the box while putting them in the box, you have to realize that this is the way this is working out in a lot of cases. So yeah, not super great for the British people for sure. Now we've got two more here. Let's talk about the pro-Palestine guys. Well, I think it's debatable. A lot of people would be tempted to just put them over here. I don't think so. I think the pro-Palestine movement is like straddling here. I think some pro-Palestine movements and groups, they are, well, first of all, they're all pro-immigration, okay? There is not a Palestinian society or movement in society that is anti-immigration. They're all pro-immigration, which is paradoxical considering their cause, right? They're trying to rally for a homeland, a sort of ethno-state of their own. And it's a little hard to argue when you're saying that the British people should not be able to do the same for themselves. So again, to avoid the hypocrisy, these guys have some kind, or sometimes in both camps here. Same thing with the climate activists. It's really easy to get somebody, again, to glue themselves to the road, but it's a little bit harder to get that person to commit a stronger act of violence. So for some groups, for some people, they've just jumped straight to violence, like the more kinetic climate activists, like things like that. But it's going to be, I think it's going to be a hard sell for like groups such as, for instance, Just Stop Oil. It's going to be a harder sell for them to jump from gluing themselves to the road and chaining themselves to things to firebombing stuff. That is a hard, it's not that much of a jump, I guess, but it is a jump. And I feel like we have to kind of acknowledge that. So that's why I'm putting these guys kind of straddling both there. Whereas places like the Muslim Defense League, various Islamic groups throughout the UK, like violence is their goal a lot of times. So, you know, of course, they're going to be in the pro-violence category. And of course, the communist socialist societies, these guys have, they're pro-violence, but they also are not as capable. So I'll kind of like, should I say they're anti-violence if they're not that capable? I don't know. I'll just move them kind of over here on the side. Whereas the Muslim Defense League guys, they're kind of like off the chart here in terms of capabilities and motivations. So yeah, that's kind of how I think this all works out. Again, I could be all washed up. I'm sure I angered quite a lot of people in talking about these groupings. But I think that this is somewhat of an important thing to understand, especially for the United States, because we're tempted to go back to this chart here. We're tempted to put all of these people, you know, in the same bucket, and just for simplicity's sake, when in actuality it's really not working out that way. There are plenty of other factors at play here. So hopefully this very tangled web of an overview helps you understand things somewhat. I'm sorry. I know it's a slightly disorganized way to show the information, but this is the best I could do for a Saturday morning. And I really wanted to cover this deep dive on the UK specifically due to the propaganda that is being portrayed by the British media. I say this in the most literal sense. I'm seeing the British media approaching North Korean levels of propaganda with these riots. I have not seen not a single British media group that will tell you the differences between these. The media is directly, like in America, we have problems with our media colluding with government so that a private company, right, is now a government agency, right? We have these problems, but in the UK, it's very severe. If I had a nickel for every time the British media said the word far right when referencing to just regular white guys in the UK who probably voted for, you know, Rishi Sunak or something like that. Even people who are politically liberal, but because they're ethnically British, they get labeled as far right. Man, if I had a nickel for every time that happened, I'd be a billionaire. Because that's all that you see. They're saying that the only level of violence is coming from the far right. Okay, well, first of all, the far right, the ethno-nationalists or national socialists, the Nazis, the swastika-toting dudes, where are they? Like, I haven't seen them on the street. They're online. I can tell you they're online for sure. But they're not in the street. They're not that stupid. But the ethnic Britons are out there in the street, you know. Just the average British citizen is out there, you know, trying to demonstrate against the police and against the, basically, it's not even really multi-tiered. It's just anti-white policing. They've had enough of it and they're demonstrating. But according to the British government and the British media, they're far right. Like, that's one of the biggest lies that I've seen from British media in a while. They're also the British media is completely ignoring the violence from these guys. The violence from them, like the Muslim Defense League guys, it's not really as solidified as people would have you believe. So don't think that I'm saying that the Muslim Defense League is just this huge organization. I don't think it is. Really, it's the best way to describe just roving bands of Muslim dudes who are going out there with sticks and 2x4s and swords and machetes and stuff. And they're attacking people randomly that are in like their neighborhood or spheres of influence or, influential areas. And the cops are letting them do it. So the media is ignoring that at all completely. Almost all the injuries the injuries so far that I have seen have come from these dudes, or the police cracking heads and stuff like that. So, it's one of those things where it's so absurd. It's so absurd that we're here now. That we have to kind of discuss these sorts of things. But, I thought this might be helpful, even for an American audience who's trying to figure out what's going on here. So, again, big lessons learned for the United States is factions exist, factions matter, definitions matter too, and understanding that who says what is important as well. The British authorities say that these guys, like, if I were to build this chart here from the British authorities' perspective, it wouldn't even look like this. So you have to realize you're taking someone's word for it. When you hear someone say that activity over there is far right, what do they mean? What belief system are they talking about here? What activity is it? Who is it committed by and who's it committed against? You see, it's really, really complicated. You can't just say bad guy there or good guy there. It really comes down to factional allegiance, heritage, culture, religion's a big one, family ties, things like that, and of course the government threat of violence over the whole thing. So very complicated, not pleasant to talk about for sure. I'm probably going to have to chop this one to bits just to make sure that it's able to survive publishing at this point. But yeah, not pleasant. Not pleasant all around. I don't wish violence on anybody, but I also I understand to some degree. You know, it's more of like a mutual understanding at some point, and like the old phrase goes, you know, politics, the very minute that first round goes past your head, politics goes out the window, you know, and it just comes down to other types of allegiances, sometimes religion, sometimes cultural, sometimes both. And that's what, unfortunately, things result in sometimes. So I think I've talked that one to death. Let's move over to another contentious topic, and that is Iran. So what is going on in the Middle East? Why is the world on pins and needles if it looks like nothing's going to happen? Well, let's talk a little bit about this, because I can write about it all in the wire all I want to, but really it's hard to capture the nuance of some of these things and how heavily I weight an idea in text form sometimes. So let me just talk about this for just a moment. I should note that, again, much like the UK, there's really no way to talk about what's going on in the Middle East without angering somebody. So, you know, all I can do is share the analysis that I've sort of come up with. At the end of the day, it's all opinion anyway, so how valuable that is to you is up for you to decide. But a lot of people seem to be incapable of understanding the concept of taking in information, taking in raw details, extrapolating that data, analyzing it, processing it, and then coming to a conclusion. It's almost like, unless you have a degree in the field, you're not allowed to talk about it. It's almost like if you don't have experience in the real world talking about these issues, you can't talk about it. You know, and even though I have both of these, I'm still not allowed to talk about it. So Israel strikes Iranian officials in Iran and in Beirut, in Lebanon, and nothing's happened. Why has nothing happened? Well, this is the longer, I'll say this, the longer it goes without Iran doing anything, the opinions start to widen more. So right when Israel did this, the next few days after Iran issued their, requisite rhetoric, everybody panicked, right? The Navy moved a bunch of resources into the region. We're starting to send fighter squadrons. We've repositioned bombers into the Middle East. Like, the United States has moved some serious stuff here, like some seriously big defense stuff. Every nation in Europe has basically said, get out of Lebanon and get out now. Most nations have issued NOTAMs over Iranian or Israeli or Lebanese airspace saying, don't fly here because there's probably going to be missiles or something. It's been pandemonium for like a week now. So I don't know. I mean, I don't have that much information either way. It seems like what I say don't matter. It doesn't matter. Clearly, the U.S. government thinks something's going on. Clearly, NATO thinks something's going on. Clearly, the European Union member states think that Iran is preparing for a massive, massive attack on Israel. I don't know. That's one idea, is that the reason for this delay is that Iran is trying to prepare for a much larger offensive, and they need some time to do it, and they're trying to get Israeli forces complacent. There's that theory. The other theory is that Iran is probably not going to do squat. They're just not interested in escalating the situation. I've seen some reports. The fact that it's being pushed by Western media should probably be a hint, but I wanted to mention it anyway. I mentioned it yesterday, so I want to mention it again. There's talks, and there's some level of credence to be given to the idea that maybe internal Iranian politics is at play here. A lot of Western media is trying to say that the newly elected president, Pezeshkian, is trying to kind of quell the situation, whereas Ayatollah and the IRGC chiefs and all the military leadership is all about targeting Israel directly, with very substantial attacks. The president doesn't want to do that, and so he's like trying to pump the brakes on this sort of thing. I don't know. Honestly, from an Iranian perspective, it would make sense for Iran to be a little hesitant. Again, this is kind of an inflammatory idea, but I think that just my own personal opinion is, I think Israel is far more likely to nuke Iran than Iran to nuke Israel. I think that it's become, and you see this repeated and replicated throughout every nation on Earth's defense policy, is that there's this general assumption that whenever Israel gets kind of backed into a corner, they'll nuke the planet. I don't know how accurate that is, but I can tell you people feel it, people think it. And whether that's a psyop to make people think that, or whether it's actually true, I don't know, but Iran might not be willing to gamble. I can tell you that the Iranians are probably less willing to gamble with the Israelis than the Israelis willing to gamble with the Iranians. Either way, like I pointed out in the Wire report, I think that it's the longer that this goes on and Iran doesn't do anything, the more likely it is for Netanyahu to not be able to hold his wad and launch another attack on Iran to kind of poke him even more. That's Netanyahu's policy. I don't know how well that's replicated throughout Israeli society, but it's definitely Netanyahu. Like, can we talk about this now a little bit more openly? Like, look, man, Netanyahu is definitely trying to provoke a war with Iran. He's trying to drag the U.S. into it. That's my own opinion, based on how far this has gone. So, I don't know. He might be successful. I just think that it's very unlikely for nuclear war to break out over this in any case. Very unlikely. But I think that in the 0.0001% chance that nuclear war does start, I don't think it's going to be Iran that starts it. The Iranians they're more likely to be aligned with Russia and China, two other factors that not a lot of people try to bring into. You got to remember, take Israel out of it for a minute. Iran's making moves, man. They've opened up major transcontinental railways over the past few months. They've increased trade with China. They've increased trade with Russia and Turkmenistan and Turkey and all these other places, I think. I'll have to look that up. But, the BRICS nations, Russia in particular, is trying to help move oil from the Middle East through to China and natural gas as well. So you've got a lot of these logistical things kind of linking all these nations together. So in American society, we tend to look at it as an Iran versus Israel thing, and we forget that there's things in the periphery that we're not looking at here. And I think one of the bigger factors at play here is probably other diplomatic things, not just Israel versus Iran. So the Iranians, I don't know. I mean, they're pretty bold, traditionally speaking. I mean, the Ayatollah is pretty bold. They're not really known for backing down. They're not really known for being the bigger person either in a diplomatic spat with Israel. But they may. I mean, I don't know. It really just depends. I think all of it's really just conjecture, to be honest, most of the time. Like, it's just kind of a waste of time to really dig super deep on this. I think for most Americans, the most value you can have for this is just making sure your gas tank's topped up, making sure that, you've got good comms, you've got, decently, okay view of world events. Financially speaking, just, making sure that, you're resilient on that front, just in case something happens in the Middle East and the stock market crashes or something like that, some kind of dip occurs or something like that. I know there's not a whole lot of way to predict that sort of thing, but, it's just sort of a very hard topic to kind of really say how it matters, to be honest. So yeah, I just don't really know what much more to say about this other than, you know, clearly the United States is expecting something to happen, and I think it may be worth considering that if nothing happens, they may poke something to happen. I don't know. I mean, that's Israeli policy. Does that extend to Americans? I don't know. You know, Israel has no problem provoking Iran, but does the United States? I don't know. Would the United States provoke Iran if Israel wanted us to? Depends on how that would look, but probably. I mean, I don't know. A lot of this stuff is just unknowns, and it probably doesn't really matter for most people out there, but I just think that since everybody's just kind of we're all tense and we're all kind of waiting for the Iranians to make their move, I don't think the Iranians making a move is the only metric we should track. We should be looking at what's happening in Israel too. You know, the Israelis might make another move. They might not wait for the Iranians to make a move. The Russians may make a move. They're kind of tied up in Kursk right now. That's a whole other scandal I'll have to talk about next week, I'm sure. But yeah, just looking at it in terms of just waiting for Iran to make a move is probably not the best way of looking at it. But despite that, guess what? Washington's looking at it like that. The DoD's looking at it like that. Everybody's just kind of waiting for something that might not occur, or if it does occur, it's not going to look like what they think it is. So I don't know. We'll be able to tell if Iran does something and it's just like minimal. We'll know this is all a farce. We'll all know this is just Iran saving face, and tensions will calm down. I am sure that it infuriates Netanyahu whenever Iran launches just some kind of piss poor attack that's really like no threat to them. Because if they're able to intercept all the munitions and only like one makes it to their target, they can't really claim that Iran threatens them. You know, if this super grand, you know, hellfire and brimstone attack from Iran doesn't really do anything, well, then Netanyahu's power declines because of that. So, I don't know. Either way, it's a hard topic to talk about. So I guess that pretty much wraps up all of the complexities of what's going on in the world today with regards to, you know, the British Isles and what's going on in the Middle East. I know it's been kind of hard to bring a lot of these thoughts together in a coherent manner. Sorry, I'm a little bit more verbose than normal today, but either way, these are some pretty complex issues. And I think, you know, unless we talk these sorts of things out, we're not really going to come to any sort of learning or understanding on any of this sort of stuff. So keeping an open mind is important, but also not letting that open mind be influenced by very obvious information shaping operations is important. So, you know, just moving forward, I think that's going to be hard enough as is. So, thank you guys all for watching. I think I've covered pretty much everything I want to cover. I'll talk more about some more events that have occurred in Monday's Wire. As usual, all the things that kind of happen over the weekend, I sort of summarize on Monday as well. But for now, that's all I've got. I'll spare you guys much more of my talking into oblivion. So thank you all for watching, and we will see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.